Everyone, welcome back to Ethics in the Good Life, led by Dr. Courtney O'Dell-Chaib, wonderful teacher of religion and ethics at Parish. She teaches primarily middle school students, but as those of you who have been a part of this class for the last several weeks know, someone who helps foster consideration, contemplation, reflection in adults. Because if you're successful with 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds, you're going to do it well with anybody. And has been raising, we haven't been answering a lot of problems.
I'm sorry.
But I think the gifts of this class are in helping us reflect on these issues, because I think a lot of the stuff we've been considering, whether it's bioethics or artificial intelligence, modern technology, are things we see in a kind of glancing blow in the newspaper or in a scroll of our feed, but how often are we giving ourselves time to think about the ethical implications of the things that are exciting and innovative in the world? And what Courtney has been wonderfully helping us do is think about the moral theology of these things. And today is going to be another one of those situations as we delve even more deeply into robots and artificial intelligence applications for warfare. You better believe there's going to be robots and technology and drones and humanless taking of life over the next however many weeks and months in Gaza. Better believe it. As there is a war in an urban context that is going to be played out on camera for the world to see. And the catastrophe of the annihilation of an entire place, street by street, this is not hypothetical. What we're talking about today is real. So, as we dive into that, I hope that you received, those of you who are on our email distribution, the driverless. Pat, you're not on the little thing?
I put my email on twice, but I haven't been getting it.
Pat, I'm just so sorry. Okay. Well, I'm actually not emailing things, so I'm misspeaking. I've been posting it in Realm. So if you use Realm,
I'll get an email.
Okay. Well, I'll send what I have been posting through an email so that everyone can have it. The reason I post it is so that there can be like on a social media feed, so that there can be engagement and dialogue with it. But if you don't have notifications on it, it's not very helpful. So I'm sorry about that, and I'll make sure it goes out. But sent out a Radiolab episode, a wonderful podcast, The Driverless Dilemma. If you didn't listen to it, I just highly recommend it because it raises some of these ethical conundrums, the complexity of this. It's talking about driverless cars and what it means to have programmed technology making a moral decision in a scenario in which a car crash is going to happen. It's a computer driving the car. How does it know which of the 2 or 3 options to make? Well, a person who imported the code into that, made that decision, but no one is actually actively making that decision. It's kind of terrifying. Now we have the warfare and the battlefront applications are similar in this. So I can't wait to hear what y'all reflect on and what Dr. O.C. has for us today. As we begin, why don't we pray this? And I'm sorry this is so faint. I made a pivot to a darker marker. But if you can, pray this with me. O Lord, mercifully receive the prayers of your people who call upon you, and grant that we may know and understand what things we ought to do, and also may have grace and power to accomplish them. Through Jesus Christ our Savior. Amen.
Thank you. Nice to see everybody again. Anybody absolutely new? First time? Welcome, friends. Thank you for joining us. We got one more after this, so I hope you come. If you're brand new, we've been considering 2 sorts of questions. What does it mean to be human? And how should humans live is sort of the frame for all ethical questions, right? But focusing on that human category being very squishy, and depending on how we define it, it really sort of shapes the rules on what we are allowed to do and not do to be considered ethical living, right? I just want to say, thank you, Casey, for starting us off. If you come from a mixed religious family, or you work in religious studies, or any kind of global issues at all, I know this has been a hard week for you. It's been a hard week for me. I thought for a brief second about maybe changing what we're going to talk about today And then I thought, no, I'm just gonna maybe hopefully give you a couple framing ideas that maybe can sustain you into the coming weeks, I hope. But if this is really traumatizing, please stay after and we'll talk together, just you and me. All right, last class we talked about what we were comfortable with and what we were not comfortable with. AI, oh, I'm sorry, this is a little small there. What we were comfortable with AI doing and not to doing, right? What sorts of tasks were we maybe like, I'm not so sure if that should be something that we take out of the hands of humans. So for example, we talked about those sorts of jobs that require a lot of relational work. So we talked about, would we like an AI priest or an AI rabbi or an AI therapist, for example? Or are there just some places where we're like, no, I need to have human relationship. And then at the end of class, I proposed to you maybe there's not a lot of things that separate us from synthetic beings anymore, except for the kind of ethical thinking we are able to do, right? And when we are asking AI to make ethical choices, then it starts getting really quite messy. And so this week we're going to talk about maybe the hardest choices we make, and that is sort of the ethics of killing. We tend to agree that killing each other is wrong, right? But we are asked to, or pushed to, quite a bit in different scenarios. So we're going to cover two today, which is one, driverless cars, which hopefully you guys listen to the podcast, but I've got a little video to cover the basics. And then the second would be sort of the theater of war, if we feel like drone warfare is ethical. All right, good catch up. Okay, hopefully you're with me. All right, so if you weren't able to listen to the podcast, which I agree is just fantastic, Radio Lab's always fantastic. I got a tiny little video that covers sort of the basic questions they're asking.
I chose Wix
what is the point of
for
reason?
my business.
There you go.
This is a thought experiment. Let's say at some point in the not-so-distant future, you're barreling down the highway in your self-driving car, and you find yourself boxed in on all sides by other cars. Suddenly, a large, heavy object falls off the truck in front of you. Your car can't stop in time to avoid the collision, so it needs to make a decision. Go straight and hit the object, swerve left into an SUV, or swerve right into a motorcycle. Should it prioritize your safety by hitting the motorcycle, minimize danger to others by not swerving, even if it means hitting the large object and sacrificing your life, or take the middle ground by hitting the SUV, which has a high passenger safety rating? So what should a self-driving car do? If we were driving that boxed-in car in manual mode, whichever way we react would be understood as just that, a reaction, not a deliberate decision. It would be an instinctual, panicked move with no forethought or malice. But if a programmer were to instruct the car to make the same move, given conditions it may sense in the future, well, that looks more like premeditated homicide. Now, to be fair, self-driving cars are predicted to dramatically reduce traffic accidents and fatalities by removing human error from the driving equation. Plus, there may be all sorts of other benefits: eased road congestion, decreased harmful emissions, and minimized unproductive and stressful driving time. But accidents can and will still happen, and when they do, their outcomes may be determined months or years in advance by programmers or policymakers. And they'll have some difficult decisions to make. It's tempting to offer up general decision-making principles like minimize harm, but even that quickly leads to morally murky decisions. For example, let's say we have the same initial setup, but now there's a motorcyclist wearing a helmet to your left and another one without a helmet to your right. Which one should your robot car crash into? If you say the biker with the helmet because she's more likely to survive, then aren't you penalizing the responsible motorist? If instead you say the biker without the helmet because he's acting irresponsibly, then you've gone way beyond the initial design principle about minimizing harm, and the robot car is now meting out street justice. The ethical considerations get more complicated here. In both of our scenarios, the underlying design is functioning as a targeting algorithm of sorts. In other words, it's systematically favoring or discriminating against a certain type of object to crash into. And the owners of the target vehicles will suffer the negative consequences of this algorithm through no fault of their own. Our new technologies are opening up many other novel ethical dilemmas. For instance, if you had to choose between a car that would always save as many lives as possible in an accident, or one that would save you at any cost, which would you buy? What happens if the cars start analyzing and factoring in the passengers of the cars and the particulars of their lives? Could it be the case that a random decision is still better than a predetermined one designed to minimize harm? And who should be making all of these decisions anyhow? Programmers? Companies? Governments? Reality may not play out exactly like our thought experiments, but that's not the point. They're designed to isolate and stress test our intuitions on ethics, just like science experiments do for the physical world. Spotting these moral hairpin turns now will help us maneuver the unfamiliar road of technology ethics and allow us to cruise confidently and conscientiously into our brave new future.
I like how positive he is. That's pretty
Yeah.
That ends so upbeat
Exactly.
after crushing all of our hopes.
Okay, I will say that I take 6:35 to work every single day. And so I think to myself, first, I really wish I didn't have to do this. I could put my car on something that'll just take me. But also the sort of dance that we have to do to make traffic possible just blows my mind on the regular. So I think the question we can maybe ask is, when we ask AI to do this kind of ethical thinking we're doing together, but at the speed that it can accomplish it with, right? And the unique limitations that we talked about last time. It's not that robots are racist, for example, but they can make choices out of the subset of choices that we give them, and we take our own personal biases into that, right? Say we'd shape the same sort of moral questions that are asked here, right? At that speed, with those limitations, what sorts of trouble are we kind of finding ourselves in? Right? Does anybody have a knee-jerk reaction? Feel like they really want to speak? Yes, sir.
I went to see The Creator over the weekend, and I recommend it,
Yeah, the creator?
the movie,
Okay.
because it's all about AI and the American pushback against
Uh-huh.
it. It's very thought-provoking,
Okay.
yeah, and I think it has a lot to do with the ethical thought process around it.
That sounds good to me, the creator.
Yeah, it's very well done.
All right.
I'm curious, and I don't know the answer to this, but I bet you do. In the world, say, just of self-driving cars, not even getting into our later conversation about drones and warfare, who is participating in the sort of moral deliberation in the programming of cars that are forced to make these not spontaneous, but these decisions?
Do you know the answer to that?
So, for automotive, one is United Nations Working Party 29 headquartered in Germany, but the USA is not in the agreement to comply the UN regulation. So USA's authorities need the national highway and transportation. So my belief is government should, because that's elected by democracy. So, but before regulation is established,
Yeah.
usually company do by their own.
Their own personal
programming.
Yeah.
It's
all coming from the training that's being done.
Mm-hmm.
So as part of the procurement of these systems, there is training that's done, reviewing long situations of video that's been collected from
Right.
those situations, and people are teaching the algorithm what to do.
Yeah. But do you know, does like Toyota, for example, draw an outside ethical board, or do they? A lot of companies now are, for other choices, are doing sort of outside funded IRBs, but I mean, it's still, so I don't know if it works similarly, or if you pull internal folks to sit on it or not.
I think you're giving the technology more credence than it really has.
Oh, for discussions about how we're going to design self-driving cars?
Ethics. I suspect at the moment there's very little ethical discussion going on.
Well, we had that nice conversation after class a couple classes ago about how, for example, running to compete with Tesla, it may not even be the ethical discussions within your own company, but who are you competing with? And what is their ethical framework, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's one of the things, both, competition and consumer choice, when he asked that question about would you buy the car that has the duty to others or the duty to protect you, I was like, protect me, that's what I want, right? I think that would be a hard question for lots of us. I think at a national level conversation is that if people are driving the traffic laws, then this fits into the traffic laws and it makes decisions based on what the traffic laws are. Of course, none of us drive the traffic laws, right? And sometimes there are situations when you really do not want to drive the traffic laws, right? So the error of ourselves, and then what would be errors based on the subset of choices that they're given. So did everybody see the video in Austin of all the self-driving cars at the four-way stop, right? Yeah. If it wasn't a self-driving car, some jerk would probably just drive over the curb and then everybody else would follow them and it would solve that problem, right? But it's not gonna do that. And so I think, I have a friend who's a mathematician and he doesn't drive. And once I asked him, I was like, well, I assumed it was because he's from New York. A lot of people from New York don't drive. And I asked him, he's like, no, it's not actually that. It's the amount of anxiety that I have thinking about all the probabilities of what's going to happen. It makes it really difficult for me to drive. Like I just can't do it. And I was like, is it maybe our ability to forget that for a minute? Like, if you start thinking too much, right? I was thinking this morning when I was trying to get on the freeway, wow, I'm glad that worked. So is it really is it that our ability to forget about that, our ability to be able to do this dance that we do with really complex tasks that we're required to do? And it is, I think, like a dance that you hope other people are participating with you respectfully and appropriately, and when they're not, right, that's the trouble. Like how important is chance or impulsivity to us being able to complete these things? What are you thinking?
Is another factor in this whether I'm sitting in the driving seat and the car is driving and I have power to correct or change, as opposed to saying I'm having a self-driving car and I'm sitting in the back seat reading a book?
Yeah.
Is that just an additional factor in the discussion? I guess.
Well, I think so. I mean, I think you're supposed to keep your hands on the wheel.
But I mean, the day's coming when you won't.
In the future, when you won't, right? Yeah, that would be a possibility.
And already they don't in the ads.
I mean, I think for some people that would be the goal, but is it really possible? I don't know.
In the industry, people don't believe it's possible.
No, I think I have a lot of skepticism of that being.
Because of you people.
Because of us.
Because you're so unpredictable.
Yeah. Are you well behaved?
David rides his bike.
Oh, lovely. See, that's
With
even
the helmet.
scarier, right?
Yes,
Because our
with a
inability
helmet.
to act appropriately is really a safety risk for you. Yeah, I mean, I think what's fun about I don't like the trolley problem classically, ethically. I don't know why it bothers me. I think because maybe the idea of pushing the large person in front of the train is like not nice to me. But what's nice about this, particularly for our ending our conversation here about tech ethics, is does that sort of tool, right? The media of technology make things more ethically appropriate for us, right? So the question of would you pull a lever? Does that change? Would you pull a lever to stop it and maybe kill one person as opposed to 5 people? Because it's the car making choices from a subset of choices, which we program, yes. But does that sort of absolve you a little bit over what's going to happen? In some ways, I think I feel more comfortable that we make choices in the moment, reactions seems more ethically appropriate sometimes, even if it were to lead to horrible outcomes, right? But when we're designing to make a choice, does it then feel like the video suggests and the podcast, like we're choosing particular groups to murder based on what we're doing? Did you feel that way? You're like, this is not my thing. That's also fine.
Well, I'm also, to add another layer of complexity to this, I gotta stop standing back here, I like to greet people.
We got 2 forwards.
Yeah. I'm so fascinated by what the Radiolab episode brings up, which I was not fully aware of, which is that the human brain is accessing 2 entirely different places in this moment of decision making.
Right.
One is rooted, I mean, like they've done copious amounts of science studying the stimulation happening in the brain. One, when you are making, prompt me with this, but when you are making a kind of calculated moral decision, it's one part of your brain. But when you are making, how did it play
Like
out
a
again?
fear-based decision. It was like a fear-based decision,
Like
an emotional decision.
No,
No?
it's not.
Wasn't it
Or
Replay.
like you're reacting to something like, no?
An emergency sort of.
Muscle memory?
No.
do y'all remember who's listened to the episode recently?
They were talking, I forget the particular language, but they were talking about like the judging spot that's calculative, and then like the older, deeper chimpy place that immediately reacts to like the inherited good of our conscience.
Yes. So the one place that you're accessing, like 5 versus 1, is one place of your brain. And that's where surprisingly, the Buddhist monks were like, kill the one.
Yeah.
And, just completely detached.
Yes.
But then there's another part of your brain where it is more calculated. Anyway, my point is that decision making in these moments is emanating from actually a variety of places within our own physiology. And that we can train ourselves, a la the Buddhist monks, to make a kind of habituated decision when presented with a morally complex moment. But for most mere mortals, you have two sides of your brain that are competing against each other in that moment where it's the motorcycle, and you're like this, and you're not just, and you're trying to figure out who's gonna, and is it the 5, and is it the 1, and what if I know the 1? Does that change it? All that sort of stuff.
But in that moment, it's all about self-preservation.
It is, and this is actually what I love about The Good Place. Here's my plug for The Good Place. Has anyone seen The Good Place? How does The Good Place solve the trolley problem at the end of season 2? So in The Good Place, a comedy that is playing with morally complicated decisions and issues in a sitcom, presents the trolley problem and actually has that wonderful whimsical scene where the demon is reenacting it for them and forcing him to actually be in a trolley and like run over 5 people. At the very end of season 2, he solves the trolley problem, I would say from a deeply Christian place, and the show is completely devoid of religious connections or intention. And yet, when he solves the trolley problem at the end of season 2, how does he solve it? I know how to solve it. It's me. It's not a choice between those 5 and that 1. I sacrifice myself. So in a profoundly Christian way, in a show that is highly secular about a demon, the demon chooses, played by Ted Danson, the most lovable demon. The demon chooses a highly Christian moral choice, which is profound. When I first watched it, I literally sat there weeping at how beautiful it was. Not that it makes it easier, not that being in the moment of the motorcyclist or me, that choosing me is going to be easy, but if that is the lodestar for us, that it is not only about am I going to kill those 5 or that 1, but that I insert myself, and the self-protection of the car, like clearly I want to buy a car that's going to protect me. That's also in the driverless dilemma where the president, the CEO of the car company is like, clearly we're going to protect our passengers who bought the car. But for a Christian, we have to insert ourselves into that moral framework and say maybe it is actually a choice of sacrificing myself for the protection of them.
I do wonder, like, sort of we talked about in the past about choices, that what sort of habituation, right, would you even need to sort of make those choices? Like, I don't know. I feel like I'm just living on a prayer from the freeway.
Maybe it's the perk.
Yeah, I know, exactly. All right, you guys want to think about?
So I could see entering your lucky number on the dashboard. Update a random number, see that makes the choice for you.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Well, if one has had time to think about it, I would think the forward crash would be better, because if you go to either side, how many other people besides those two vehicles? I mean, everybody behind them is gonna be screwed.
And to complicate it further, what if it was your grandchildren riding with you?
That's right.
Or I saw one the other day, like all those stories about people getting hit on the freeways, because once you've gotten in an accident, then you're worried about the insurance and waiting for the cops, and so you're sitting on the freeway, and then people hit. I mean, there's so many different things that we have to keep all together in our brains that make it really hard to make those choices.
The reason the trolley problem has been a highly enduring thought experiment in the realm of moral philosophy is because it is so versatile. So you can take the experiment and be like, yes, if it's just me, what is my decision? But what if I fill my car with grandchildren? Now what is my decision? What if, and I love that example of the helmet versus the non-helmet. You're like, you know, well,
Survival of the fittest.
if I hit the guy with the helmet because they have a choice, did I just penalize a person for making a good choice? If I hit the person without the helmet, have I just acted as judge and jury on a person who didn't choose to wear a helmet that day? Like, the cruelty of that ethical decision. It is complicated, hard to make the choice. As Christians, though, I think that we have to ask ourselves, being a people who live in the light of sacrificial love, how does that inform our moral decision making in a moment like this? How is it not just a decision about the other and creating the least harm in the other, but how could an act of sacrifice on my part be somehow incorporated, or should be somehow incorporated into my actions, my behavior?
So, don't you think that you're putting a little too much into this in the following sense? Because I've been faced with decisions about swerving or not. Driving. Right? And usually, I'm not totally aware of what's on either side. I mean, I sort of know, but, you know, if I think somebody's on either side, I'll probably run over the box and swerve around it, but who knows, you know, it's like instantaneous. Did that yesterday driving, swerved off, nobody was over there, thankfully, right? To get around it, you know, it's, depends on, now, this wasn't a refrigerator, so.
Or also calculating what's really gonna kill you.
But I think, you know, maybe AI in a sense can be a plus, because it actually has more information than I think we're taking in all the time while we're driving, because it's constantly accessing it. Well, you're listening to music, or, you know, you're kind of looking at the landscape or doing whatever, and you're back to reality. Here this is happening, and it's a fast decision. So I think that's an interesting question to bring up.
Okay, I'm going to take it forward a little bit, and then we might have more time to return to what you'd like to talk about too. So the other piece that I sent you, if you had time to watch it, is this video, The Dawn of Killer Robots, which is a little old, and that's important for a reason, because it's filmed when they were testing out Atlas at the DARPA competitions. Okay, so you can sort of see what Atlas looked like in 2015. But the woman from the UN was having that discussion about how she feels like the second that she saw humanoid robots, that she was definitely sure that they were going to be weaponized into the future. I mean, you might have varying feelings on if that's actually going to happen or not. And then if it were to happen, how do you feel about that, right? I think from the former classes have kind of agreed that we would like robotics to work towards the public good. And do we feel like weaponization participates in that discussion, right? Do we want, for example, Boston Dynamics gave a spot, that's the dog one, the yellow dog one, gave a spot to Boston PD and NYPD, and there was very strong reactions from the public about them using these robotics. It's not even the one that looks like a person, but looks like a dog. Do you have any strong feelings about that?
About which?
About law enforcement utilizing weaponized robotics. Or, I mean, I think when it's attached to law enforcement, people can view it as a weapon, period. Whether or not it actually has those capabilities, I think the woman in the video is worried about actually putting guns on these robots. But just having it there, like for example, Spot can knock down doors. Spot's meant to find things for you, to go into spaces that are dangerous.
Well, didn't something like that already happen
Here
downtown?
downtown.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you remember what happened?
Yeah, it was a mass shooting downtown.
Yeah, they use the robot.
Dallas police, yeah.
To go just look around?
No.
I did not know that. If somebody has that article, you sent me.
It was about 5 years ago.
Well, they,
It went right up to
Went
the.
into a garage.
Yeah.
It's
I
on
don't
the,
think-
the 5
You're okay with that? Okay, so Liz is very, so we'll start with that. I think, particularly from the perspective, if you have time to watch the video from those that are speaking from the military, that this saves lives. It protects our soldiers, using them particularly for bombs, right? And maybe they're a little bit more cagey in the video, and if they're actually using them offensively with guns, but that this is a good thing, right? Do we have others that are feeling that way strongly? Yes.
I think that the drones give you the capability of killing without being part of it. And I think that changes your whole thinking about what you're doing. And you can take the difference between, let's say, do I dare bring this into the present? You know, the actual gunman coming in and killing people versus dropping bombs on things. We think about it differently because we're not personally involved. And that changes, I think, ethical thinking about what you're doing. And that's an important component.
But it also lets you be more precise.
Yes.
At your target.
Yes. The woman that was talking about military ethics says specifically that this is more targeted bombing, instead of just raising the section that you might be thinking about, that you could be more specific. Go ahead.
Haven't I seen articles in the paper about robots being used by the police to disarm explosives in buildings,
Yes,
so that people do not have to go in? Yeah. So that's an arm of the police, isn't it?
Yes, and I mean, I think, so if you have time later to go, new friends, there's I think what Father Casey's been saying out, lots of different resources for you, but one of the ones was Boston Dynamics talking specifically about that this is what these are designed to do. They're not designed to be offensive, but defensive, to do things like that. For example, to dismantle bombs, go into fire spaces for some of them, to go in places that we don't necessarily want people to go.
I think my concern with it is the same way Amazon can predict that I'm gonna buy some tchotchke or item pretty reliably. I worry that it might try to predict what a criminal intends to do, and in that very small space, predict incorrectly. You know, we can't prosecute people for something they haven't done yet, but I think the technology may be a couple steps ahead.
And I think one of the elements, sort of like you're both discussing with drones in particular, right, is that we sort of have a comfort that our tech is giving us what we want from it, right? And then we can make choices from that. Particularly the gentleman who was interviewed talking about, I live in a completely other country, I'm sending drones, and I don't really know how to deal with that I'm not actually there, I'm not actually seeing these things. And if it was a person, they could come into the space and see it's a birthday party and not a terrorist cell and make a decision, right? But we can't this way, right? And we Americans have made mistakes from that perspective, where we bomb things that are not what they're supposed to be. So you sort of have that, make a decision, but maybe it's not the right decision. One of the ones that makes me kind of nervous is trying to determine the age of people in a particular car. And do we feel like they're young males, 20-ish males, and no, they're actually 12-year-old males or something like that. But that just seems really imperfect to me.
You can tell in that video where he's being interviewed about his job to watch where the drones were, or to use the drones to hit certain targets, that he was pretty uncomfortable with that. And there was also discussion about how our idea of the drones being able to target specific spots isn't always accurate, because there were victims there that spoke about that.
And I think it takes him out of maybe the ways that they might have traditionally talked about his needs or met that sort of ethical questions, that it's shifting and we're not necessarily catching up, that he felt completely unsupported. Not that I'm saying that other soldiers don't feel unsupported, because they certainly do. But this is sort of a new level that maybe hasn't been under discussion of like, what am I responsible for with these mistakes, and how do I negotiate that when I'm not even there? So you're sort of imagining everything also at the same time. Okay, I know that we're going real fast, but I wanted to give you just a couple of touch points. Yes, sir.
You
You
talking
tell me.
about half my career in designing targeting for smart weapons.
Okay.
And
we got an expert.
We've got, 10 or 20 people that are doing this, and we're all, considering whether being able to improve weapons so that if we think that the bad guys are in a green Mercedes-Benz, we'll go hit a green Mercedes-Benz.
Right.
The thought process that seemed to evolve among most of the engineers was, if we can go in and blow up one particular hotel, one particular teepee in the desert, one particular bridge, then we don't do the Hiroshima.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was comfortable to think that, yes, we're out there killing people, but a lot fewer than if both sides went to nuclear war.
Yeah, I think the question that sort of remains though, and this is really hard to talk to my students about, right? Because we're still teaching them that war is like we're coming together, we're two factions, we're fighting against each other, right? It doesn't work that way. Also, they've lived their entire lives with some sense of this kind of nebulous war that America is participating in now, with like sort of faceless, sort of locationless sometimes, right? Because I think we also make choices that go beyond the boundaries of what we said we were going to do. That it's hard for them to like understand, what are we actually accomplishing? And if we think about the ethics of war, have this sort of drone technology solved any of the things that we wanted it to solve? Like, has it, for example, changed any sentiment about relationships with America by using these drones? And I think the video kind of leaves that question hanging in the air, as if we make more enemies by not actually being present, right, than less. Which is an interesting question. Okay, I thought you might want to hear a little bit about Just War Theory, because it comes from a Christian tradition, so this might be something that is deeply important for you. I'll get these slides are all on there, so if we don't have time to talk about everything, we will not. You're welcome to go peruse, and it's got links too. But we've always had, beginning of recorded history, evidence that there's been discussions about what is and is not appropriate in the theater of war. Hopefully to be mutually beneficial, right? If you're gonna bring a sword, then maybe I should also bring a sword, because we're respecting each other, that certain weapons are allowed, certain actions are allowed or not allowed, right? And then we know is what is underhanded and what is participating appropriately. What's interesting about, even from the beginning of text, the oldest text that we have, is that this idea of participating together in the theater of war with appropriateness only applies if both parties consider themselves to be fully human, okay? So, for example, Spain might treat France this way, but that doesn't mean that Spain's gonna treat the Aztecs this way, because they don't view them as actual engaging partners, right? So this idea of what tactics are appropriate or not, ethical or not, kind of goes out the window depending on who you're engaging. Does that make sense? Yeah. So then more things might be permissible, things that really might keep us up at night as being kind of horrible. Okay, do you see these are lovely gentlemen here? Last time I showed this to the upper school kids, they were like, what's wrong with that guy's hair? I said, don't get distracted. What's the point? It's his hair. I'm like, I don't know, okay. But I think Augustine, or Augustine, however you like to call him, gets at sort of the heart of maybe what is really painful, and that is that humans delight in many things, and we can also delight in killing. We can also delight in hurting each other, so we need to be really careful about how we engage in war. If we have no choice, I think he was very realistic about that Christians live where Christians live, and if you are called to engage in war, that you might have to do that. It should be a just war over an unjust one. It's a little bit more nebulous about what that means, and his buddy helps him out, right? What we call just war theory today, it's not just Christian. I mean, it's also, like we talked about with the UN, squishy enforcement, right? I think it does apply to some international laws, but I'm not saying that everybody participates in this way, because they don't. But the idea is that we would have rules that would cover when you engage in war, what happens during war, and then more recently, what happens after. How do you restore after people say they're done, in some senses, right? And I think that Thomas Price released hope that war is the just cause. You really have a reason to do this. A last resort that you've done everything possible to not go to war. The proper authority is going to do it, right? I just can't declare war myself personally and say, are you with me? No, it has to be some kind of leader, although that's interesting how we determine who the leader is. The right intention for what you're doing. Hopefully an actual possibility of success, like you're not gonna kill people for no reason, like you have some sort of goal in mind. And that the end goal is sort of justified with the kind of violence that you, I know this is a lot of words, I'm gonna summarize for you. Justified with the actions that you have. When we try to think about war ethics, for many of us, you may be a pacifist and this is just not like gonna make sense to you at all, this is not your thing, it's very upsetting for you, I understand. But I think it does sort of, if you read the news this week, you'll hear echoes of this language over and over, of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. What are you allowed to do or not do? Like for example, how much force should be used when you go into a certain scenario? What actually needs to be used to achieve your goal? When is the force maybe being used to achieve political goals as opposed to actual goals within war? And then of course, which people should not be involved? Who is combatants and who are not combatants? We've always kind of classically said women and children and healthcare workers, even older texts, right, have said the same thing, that civilians should be protected, but you have different rules for people that you're engaged with fighting. Okay? All right, when you're in the theater of war, we sort of have rules about what kinds of means you can use, for example. So biological weapons or chemical weapons are generally frowned upon. And I think this sort of applies to the discussion that we're having today about, do we feel that weaponized robotics, particularly drones, really have gone beyond sort of these categories we've discussed? Like for example, these are lovely, but like you said, nuclear war changes the game, right? So we'd have to rethink then again, what does it mean to be in war when we can eliminate part of the planet? What does it mean now when, for example, the United States soldiers don't have to be in particular places in order to achieve certain goals? Okay, and then last, I know we've only got 4 minutes. What do we need to do to sort of ethically respond after war? I think one interesting thing that my students don't really like is this idea that orders is not an excuse, that you are still, even though you're part of an army, generally ethically agree that you are still responsible for your personal actions, and you can be brought up on trial for those choices that you make. Right? They don't like, I haven't picked exactly why they don't like it, and I think it might be age. We tell them what to do all the time. They're very frustrated by that, right? So it's hard to think about being personally responsible. And I thought this one was really interesting too, that peace treaties need to be fair and just to all parties. I mean, I think that's really difficult to even imagine. But a goal, right, an ideal. Okay, anything you'd like to discuss a little bit more in our last few minutes?
I think the after effects of a war are too seldom considered. You can look at the pictures on the television at the moment about the Ukraine. I have personal friends there, and I receive correspondence from them daily about what's going on. And what it's going to take to put that back together is unimaginable.
Right.
I was born in 1935, and so I remember World War II very clearly, and the effects of the bombing on the city of Portsmouth where I lived. Right. And the bomb sites after the war, many, many of them through the city where houses had been just destroyed or were piles of rubble. When I came to the United States in 1976, there were still bomb sites that had not been rebuilt after the war in 76.
Right.
So it's not a matter of saying when the war's over, we'll just pour billions of American dollars in and build the thing up again. It's not that easy.
Right. Right. Is our destructive capacity just so big now that we can't even imagine that sort of being a possibility, right? Or I think what makes it hard is that if what was happening before, like for example, I was a young adult when we were talking about Afghanistan, it's like particularly the president's wife talked about, we have to liberate the women here, they are oppressed, this is what we need to do. It was very much using the image of a woman in a burqa to just remember as being everywhere. It's like, this is what we need. When the way that the other country is participating is considered the problem, right? How things were before. It's interesting to even think about that rule applying, right? Because what are you returning to? If we said the reason we were going in is because of oppression, then what is it going to look like after? And I think sometimes this idea of who is or is not in the press group is really squishy, right?
When you go back to nothing,
yeah,
which is
what
what a
do
lot
you
of these people are going to
make?
be doing, going back to a bomb site, nothing.
Right, and the expectation that what you build from there is always going to be good is, I think really naive, right?
I want to just contribute one thing, recognizing how little time we have, which is the idea that war is inevitably and always morally harmful, whether it is justified according to traditional just war criteria, that war always has moral harm, no matter what. That even Augustine or anyone who would, within the Christian tradition, say that there could be criteria met that justify this war, nevertheless, it will be morally harmful. And what worries me about the distancing of combatants from conflict, from battle, is this idea that we can somehow spare ourselves from that moral harm or that moral dilemma by being further physically removed from it. And yet what we're learning by that guy who operates the little video controller in like Colorado Springs,
right.
or wherever he is, who's sending the drone, or the guy who's programming the computers that are gonna go inform the robots, the moral harm is still gonna be there, whether we are like, oh, we're not there, or it's all the way on the other side of the planet. The moral harm is always there because when people are taking the lives of other people, there is inevitably moral harm. And I'm just worried as a rapidly innovating and modernizing society as it relates to violence, that we are somehow tricking ourselves into thinking that this is better, or that this is less morally harmful. And
I think that there's not a lot of space for complexity, and I know that people will call you, as they called me this week, to make a simple response, and I hope that we have discussed that nothing is simple, and I know that's really hard. I'm with you in empathy. Our last time, I'll be so sad to leave you, but our last class is next class. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more fun. We're gonna think about this American idea of the good life. What is the American good life? Hope I'll have a few surprises for you. If you have time, if you remember from high school or college reading, Bradbury's Dandelion Wine, it's a tiny selection from there where a man tries to build a happiness machine. And then he puts his wife in it. Or actually, she puts herself in it. We'll see what happens. I have time to stay as long as you would like to talk with you. But anyways, thank you for coming.
Go in peace. Love and serve the Lord.
Thank you.